probably bouncing all over the place. Um, I'll go into a room. I've been going into rooms, forgetting what I was doing and remembering an hour later. So, plus I've had a lot of my real job to do. It's been a busy but productive day. Did everybody see that we're gonna just go about an hour so we can go support Top on current event stuff? So yeah, Pats, I'm like that. Just the ADD. I mean, I'm super squirrely. So again, thank you, Nomad, for everything you do for the channel. I do appreciate it. Freedom Fighter, Pat, Ms. Rismet Cow, and Sherry Tilly. Who was first? Oh, of course, Ms. Rismet Cow. Brady, I hope you have your ears on. I know Sherry's just lurking. Love the Top, but you know. Hey now. You gotta wait till the squid gets back. So, all right, let's get started since we're going to jump over there once we're done here. So we're on chapter 4. You know, we did a lot about the discongruence between what values we were taught in basic training and then what we actually saw in combat. And you know, it was a fact of life. So we will proceed from that point. If I had the right stuff. Okay. Chapter 4. A friend was liquefied. Oh boy. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Darren Dawes had just come back from a morning patrol on the outskirts of Marja, Afghanistan, when his best friend, Kruger, got shot. It was a blazing hot day, June 1st, 2010, and Americans and Taliban fighters were locked in a desperate fight along Marja's narrow, shadowed streets and back alleys and across its outlying poppy fields and irrigation canals. The White House and the Pentagon had vowed to wrest Marja from the Taliban control and create a prosperous, safe, democratically run city as a model for the new Afghanistan. And Marine Corporal Zachary Kruger and the Marines of 1-6, along with thousands of other American troops, had been struggling since January to make this happen. The Taliban were dug in and determined to stay. The fighting was continuous and deadly. Darren Dawes is a slender man with the dense black hair, a prominent nose, and soulful brown eyes that often reflect unvoiced pain and sorrow. Like the combat Marines I know, Dawes is outwardly tough. He endured extremes of discomfort, deprivation, and grueling physical and emotional stress that most of us will never know. During his 2 combat tours as an infantryman in Afghanistan, he was an aggressive fighter, not the one to hang back. And yet, Doss seems the most sensitive among the Marines of 1-6, more vulnerable to emotional bruising. To this group of men hardened by violence of war, it felt as if Doss was the youngest, everyone's little brother. In Marja, he was about to turn 22. That morning, Doss was the last man in a line of Marines heading back to their outpost after a routine patrol. Climbing a low wall, he heard AK-47 rounds impacting around him and realized that someone was trying to shoot him. Hey, Toker. In the back, he scrambled quickly over the wall, cursing loudly, and made it back okay. But he barely had time to catch a breath before guys came running, yelling, Marine down, Marine down. And grabbing their body armor and helmets and weapons, Doss raced out with them. And as they sprinted across an open field, he could hear on another Marine's radio that there was a firefight underway. It was bad, and the casualty was Kruger. I was tight with Kruger, Doss said. My heart just sank. With reason, death was a constant in their lives. 2 Marines had been killed within days of their arrival in January. Others followed, including Corporal Jonathan Porto, who drowned when his armored vehicle tipped over into an irrigation canal, and he was trapped inside. Hey, Wingspan, yay, good to see you. Pats, howdy. That May, the Marines of 1-6 had been shaken by the death of a popular leader, First Lieutenant Brandon Barrett, who was shot by a sniper. In the following 3 weeks, Joshua Desforges, Nicholas Parada Rodriguez, and Philip Clark were killed. On Monday, May 31st, Anthony Delacio was killed. Now, on Tuesday, Kruger was down. The Marines leaped into the gully where Kruger's squad was hunkered down in a firefight, so intense that the barrel of one Marine's saw was glowing red. Doss fell to his knees beside Kruger, who had been shot in the thigh and was bleeding heavily. They got a tourniquet on. A medevac helicopter had been called. Doss grabbed Kruger's hand and squeezed, making jokes, trying to keep Kruger conscious. An army chopper landed a distance away, and a crewman came sprinting through gunfire across an open field and flung himself down. He hadn't brought a stretcher. As the Marines returned fire to cover him, the medic ran back to the chopper and returned with a stretcher. Doss, another Marine grabbed Kruger's arms and dragged him up and out of the gully and got him on the stretcher. They ran. The field they had to cross had recently been plowed, leaving foot-high ridges, making it difficult to run without turning an ankle. The larger danger was the Taliban gunfire raking the field. All hell was breaking loose, Doss thought. He could hear rounds impacting the dirt. By chance, a New York Times photographer was riding on the chopper. One of his images shows Doss, his right hand gripping the stretcher handle, helping to shove Kruger into the chopper. Doss waited as it lifted off in a blizzard of pebbles and grit and tilted away. Good grief, Wingspan. Yeah, that's what I've just had it playing loud throughout the house for me all day. Leaving, let's see, within a few minutes, the firefight died away, leaving an enormous emptiness, and the Marines trudged home. Kruger survived. The army medic, received a medal for bravery. No medals were awarded to the Marines, who resumed their work without pause. That's usually how it goes. I will say the Marines are hard about giving out awards. Uh, I wouldn't say I misspoke. I shouldn't say giving out awards because they're not gimmies. They are earned, but I think their standard is very, very rigid. The shock and grief of seeing his best buddy grievously wounded, in pain, and at risk of dying clearly were an emotional blow to Darren Dawes. But in the continuing maelstrom of Marcia, there was no opportunity to quietly absorb what would be a shattering experience for any human being. Here it became just another emotional injury to a young man already wounded by loss. Over there, you really don't talk about it, Doss once told me. You don't have time to sit there and cry about shit. You got shit to do. Go on patrol. You don't dwell on it. Darren Doss told me the story about Kruger over lunch recently at the Blue Ribbon Diner in Schenectady, New York. I'd picked him up that morning at the VA Medical Center in nearby Albany, where Doss was an outpatient in the mental health clinic. He is diagnosed with PTSD, but his moral injuries have cut more broadly and deeper. He carries wounds of the soul that are eating away at him. 5 years after Marcia, Doss was able to name 6 separate prescription drugs. Precipitation. Hey, Billy. Uh, Fantastic, sir. Well, you're better than D-Doc, and Mrs. Metcalf's better than us all. Um, he is currently taking for anxiety, depression, pain, and insomnia, all for his experiences at war. At lunch, his head drooped, his eyelids sagged, and occasionally he appeared to doze off. When we were done, he stepped outside to smoke a Newport. Ugh, I hate menthols. He stood alone in the parking lot, gazing out into the distance. Hey, Cap. The politicians and policymakers and generals who rushed the United States into war in 2001 and again 2 years later never thought to prepare for the length and intensity of those conflicts and the psychological wounds the troops would bring home. That is mostly not true. No. It is narrow. In a narrow basis, it's not true. There were those fighting and saying, look, it's going to take 250,000 troops and it's going to be a generational thing at a minimum, more, and it's going to be more like Germany. I mean, we're still in Germany, right? We're pushing up on 80 years of occupation. So we're not occupying, but since the occupation by the Allies, and then the demarcation of East and West. So it was heavily written about in white papers. So that's anyway, that I'm going back to my personal memories of hell that was played back in those days. and I was just a lowly staff sergeant. Thousands of military professionals in intelligence and intelligence analysts worked briskly in the offices along the Pentagon's 17 miles of fluorescent lit corridors. But when the United States went to war in Afghanistan in the autumn of 2001, few of them foresaw that cleaning out the ragtag bands of Taliban would last much beyond the spring of 2002. Attention had quickly turned to Iraq, which the Pentagon and the White House gave assurances would be a short campaign. After all, the most recent war, in the experience of many officers, was Operation Desert Storm in 1991 that took only 3 weeks of airstrikes and a 4-day ground war to achieve victory over Iraq's military and military and psychological injuries seemed to be minimal. Oh, except for that horrible Gulf War syndrome, right, Pentagon? Right, VA? Yeah. Well, I mean, we were briefing that. We wrote white papers. We gave proof as to why both Iraq and Afghanistan would be problematic for generations to come. So I completely agree with you, Woodrow, and many others. I mean, Eric Shinseki got dismissed for saying just that. Doram, Donald. I have a half a colon because of that. By the time American troops poured over the border into Iraq in March 2003, the invincibility of the U.S. war machine was a bedrock conviction within military and political circles. On May 1, 6 weeks after U.S. troops invaded in the spring of 2003, May 1. Oh, okay. President George W. Bush declared that major combat operations have ended. That was something of a surprise to the grunts of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, with whom I was embedded as they conducted patrols and weapons searches that summer in East Baghdad. The small-scale skirmishes and bombings then breaking out were modest compared with what was coming, but Washington held to its belief that the war in Iraq was winding down. By October, despite the battle losses of 225 American dead, the Pentagon was making plans to recall 30,000 troops from Iraq as not needed. Afghanistan is an interesting deal. If there were no terrorist training camps, I doubt anyone would care about it, much less want to occupy it. But if you cut off the money, if you cut off the head of the snake, it would have been much better, right? Take that first, starve them out for a little while, go in and take care of business. The gin knows. Well, I mean, the gin always knows. GIs were assumed to be bedrock strong as well. A report prepared for VA clinicians in 2004 acknowledged insufficient understanding of the impact of severe war zone stress. But judging from how quickly people seem to recover from car crashes, the report said, it is safe to assume that although acute stress reactions are very common after exposure to severe trauma in war, the majority of soldiers who initially display a stress will naturally adapt and recover to normal functioning during the coming months. So, oh, Coker, that's cool as shit. That's what I was going to get into, Pat's Cat. So, a car crash, like we talked about in the complex PTSD efforts episodes, is an instant trauma, right? When you're over and over and over getting into firefights, you're getting sent back to back. You know, the book answer is you're going back to back every 18 months, which is not necessarily true. But so I think that a combat injury is more like a complex PTSD thing, because it's deeply changing your neural pathways, and that reprogramming is it takes time and effort. It takes work. Yes, exactly, Pat's Cat. Pod Joe, I mean, terrain or minerals, I mean, extracting minerals in Afghanistan, if we wanted to do that, we would have stayed there, right? Now we've left it for China to go get, unfortunately. If we would have helped the Afghans, extract it and help out the Afghani government profit off of that more than they'd profit off of opium, it would be great. Unfortunately, Mrs. Metcalf, the mineral extraction is what just caused so much colonization in Africa, right? So, anyway, back to this, away from my tangents. There had been early signs that Afghanistan and Iraq would be different, more challenging for the troops, and at a higher human cost. In July of 2003, the Army Surgeon General, Lieutenant General James B. Peake, sent a team of mental health specialists to Iraq. It was an act of courage and foresight, not appreciated within Washington's ruling circles at the time. But Peake knew combat stress and its effects on troops. As a young enlisted soldier, he'd been selected for West Point, was commissioned an officer, and won a Silver Star for combat valor in Vietnam. Before becoming a physician, he was aware of the lingering physical and mental health problems that followed the troops' return from previous wars. When the invasion of Iraq was launched, he told me recently, we recognized that the quicker we got on this, the quicker we would understand what the realities were of the current war, the better prepared we'd be to deal with it. Peake's team found what he suspected that December. The Army's Mental Health Advisory Team, MHAT, ooh, that's a terrible reported that 15% of the troops then serving in Iraq, or roughly 20,000 soldiers, screened positive for traumatic stress. Think about that. Think if 15% of all living vets today had some type of traumatic stress. So let's look at that number. I have a number in my head. Let's see if I'd say 2.5. Oh, God dang. So 2.5 million. I was thinking 2.5 million would have the combat stress. There's 17.9 million vets. So what's 17.9 million? Times, oops, we're gonna go with 0.15. So 2.685 million, based on a pretty a 20,000 for a poll is a pretty good good number. China and Mecca. Oh, America. I was like Mecca. Well, neither one can survive without the other right now. So, okay, so here we go. So that's what I'm thinking. So 2.685 million veterans alive that have some sort of traumatic stress. A larger group was tagged with depression, anxiety, or traumatic stress. Oops. But fewer than 1 in 4 of them had gotten any help because they were afraid of the stigma of seeking help, or because no help was available. The military's overriding culture, by necessity, was one of the stoic acceptance of pain and discomfort. Not complaining, but the cause was becoming evident. The Surgeon General's report noted the rising suicide rate among troops in Iraq. 15.6 suicides per 100,000 was already dramatically higher than the Army's peacetime average of 11.6. The numbers might be an aberration, the mental health team concluded. It's only gone up, by the way, y'all. That 22 a day is significant, or was significantly higher the last I checked. Jess, I don't know if I said hello, but hello. Somewhat hopeful that data did not signify an escalating rate of suicide, but the flood of military mental health injuries was underway. In 2005, the VA began frantically hiring some 7,500 additional mental health professionals to care for the rising tide of returning troops in need of psychological care. It wouldn't be enough. By 2006, the year Stephen Canty was itching to join the Marines, fighting in Iraq had increased in intensity and savagery. 823 Americans were killed in combat there that year. 6,412 were wounded. 1,500 miles away, the war in Afghanistan was bogging down in its 4th year of bloody slogging. American combat deaths had doubled since 2002. And back home, a majority of Americans for the first time agreed, thank you, Jess, that the war in Iraq was a mistake and that President Bush had no plan to end it. John Murtha, a retired Marine and a conservative senior congressman, I did a lot of special capabilities work in Murtha's congressional district. He unfortunately got trapped up in some scandals, but he got caught. He's one of the few Congress people that get caught. Declared the war was flawed policy wrapped in illusion. Regardless, voters kept returning to office, politicians who were determined to press ahead with the wars. The politicians never seemed to give two shits about sending other people to die. Even the veterans could give two shits once they get into office. They learned that it is more profitable to send us to die than it is to take care of us. The Army Surgeon General's mental health advisory team returned to Iraq that summer of 2006, where it again conducted surveys and focus groups among soldiers and Marines and found significant psychological trauma. 2/3 of Marines then serving in Iraq had seen the severe wounding or death of a buddy. In individual interviews, one soldier told me the Army researchers he had witnessed my sergeant's leg getting blown off. Another had seen friends burned to death. Others reported I had to police up my friends off the ground. Because they got blown up. A friend was liquefied in the driver's position on a tank, and I saw everything. And a huge fucking bomb blew my friend's head off like 50 meters from me. Ugh. Politics and military is going to be very prevalent. Yeah, I know, Woodrow, but I mean, like, you have the Murthas of the world. I think he was allowed to resign, but he may have ended up with a record. Senior military leaders with SA issues get reassigned and tucked away like clergy do. It's not the same system that you and I would face. I read all about it. Yes. Yeah, they tried to cover it up. Just like a certain Army Green Beret. Petraeus. Yeah, I worked with Petraeus when I as a civilian. On the civilian side, and I gotta say, I always thought he was a genius, but thinking with that little head will always get you into trouble. And he did. I mean, he surrounded himself with smart people, but starting to sleep with a reporter and giving them information, well, that's just stupid. I still won't talk about shit that I see in movies, because I signed an NDA. I keep my promises. They, on the other hand, do not. Like Darren Doss, most of the Americans we sent to war seemed capable of toughing their way through this level of emotional stress, at least temporarily. But the survey team documented high levels of anxiety and depression. 20% of soldiers, just over 28,000, screened positive for depression or anxiety. 20%, y'all. And those are the ones that were honest, because I know that I was not honest on a lot of my screenings. Screened positive for depression or anxiety, and some were diagnosed with PTSD. No, mine do expire. They get me sometimes by calling and asking for advice, and then I have to sign a new one, but I don't mind. I'll give advice. Pays well. So depressing. Change is all we have sometimes. Yeah. More significant, the detailed surveys also turned up strong evidence of damaging moral injury. The personal and military moral codes that young Americans took with them to war were being corroded by their experiences in battle. Despite what they'd been taught about honor and dignity, for instance, almost 2/3 of the Marines surveyed told the MHAT researchers that they would not report a buddy for injuring or killing an innocent non-combatant. Fewer than half of the soldiers and Marines believe that Iraqi civilians should be treated with dignity and respect. The MHAT found, I think for SAPs, mine are 30 years. So was my last read off. 2014 was my last read off. So I'll be dead before they but before I'm free of them. So equally distressing, the military suicide rate kept rising. By the end of 2006, reaching 16.1% per 100,000. Over the next 6 years, oops. So if we take 16.1% of dang it, 17.9. I just want to put this in the whole numbers, right? So that would be 16.1% would be 2,881,900. These issues are not adequately addressed with a DMO questionnaire. Far too complicated a subject. Woodrow, I was sick and I was messed up when they were when I was getting medically retired, and and my DD 214 is a mess. My DD 215 is a mess. Uh, and I got to fix all this, right? I just have all the originals of everything. So yeah, they just wanted me gone. They just wanted me out. But they were rolling me into a civilian role immediately. I had 30 days off, and then I was on a plane to somewhere else. So they fucked me either way. So over the next 6 years, the rate for active duty soldiers would double, rising to a shocking 29.6 suicides per 100,000. The survey team reporting back to Washington strongly urged that the Defense Department develop battlefield ethics training to soldiers and Marines, know exactly what is expected of them. Now let's read this sentence again, please. The Defense Department developed battlefield ethics training so soldiers and Marines know exactly what is expected of them. You're in combat. Why don't you not put us in situations to where we're having to deal with these moral dilemmas, unless it's absolutely necessary, not for some grudge or some misguided, misplanned fantasy of elected officials that never did shit. And I'm talking about the Bush administration. There were so few combat vets back then in any position. In other words, train soldiers to recognize the key to preventing moral injury, helping to see and act on what is right, but it was already too late. For the physically wounded, astonishing advances in military trauma medicine meant that almost everyone in these new world wars who fell wounded in battle was being saved. In World War II, 7 of 10 wounded GIs survived. The others died of their wounds. In Afghanistan, 9 of 10 wounded troops were being saved, a rate of 93.3%. Their surviving wounded were carried home, grateful to be alive, but often weighed down with the trauma of losing limbs or genitals, guilt for having survived buddies who died, angry at themselves for getting hurt, shame at having to leave buddies behind. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we hadn't had that issue since Vietnam, really. And we did 20 years of it this time. The battle wounded were beginning to attract attention as they recuperated. At Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., I watched cheerleaders, politicians, rock stars, and baseball players arrive to visit. And occasionally the president would quietly slip inside. The wounded were feted at regular off-campus steak dinners held in their honor and at annual July 4th extravaganzas on the Mall in Washington. But larger numbers of patients were quietly evacuated from the war zones with invisible mental health injuries, a testament both to the ferocity of the wars and to the psychological damage they were causing. By 2011, the Army's medical community had acknowledged an epidemic of psychological trauma, with 500,000 troops diagnosed with symptoms common to PTSD and moral injury. Some of the damage was severe. Across the military forces, the rate at which troops were hospitalized for mental illness had risen 87% since 2000. Roughly 250,000 Army soldiers were receiving outpatient mental health therapy a year. 250,000. 10,000 a year were hospitalized for mental health treatment. At least 76,000 Army soldiers had been prescribed opiate drugs. Other pills for anxiety and insomnia were handed out informally to troops in combat. A study by the Institute of Medicine, the health arm of the independent nonprofit, non-governmental, National Academy of Sciences, concluded that the rapid rate of multiple deployments was having a cumulative effect. 33,000 soldiers who had deployed 3 or 4 times had received a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, or acute stress, according to the IOM report. Many were being returned to battle nonetheless. By 2010, the Army was holding back 13,000 active duty Army soldiers, physically and mentally battered, who had been declared unfit to deploy. The repercussions of these psychological injuries didn't just impact individuals, they resulted in a deterioration of the military itself. A faint echo of the demoralization, crime-ridden post-Vietnam Army of the 1970s. I should have put quotes around the crime-ridden post-Vietnam Army of the 1970s. There were a lot of drug problems. Carrie T, hey, glad to have you. Always pleasant to see you. I want to thank Carrie T. She has helped by shouting me out over at Big and Twos. So, or Big and Eyes. I'm not sure what he does. It's Big and Two, think. So she continually shouts me out over there. So I do appreciate Carrie T's support. Pa Joe, I agree. Escape comes in all forms. Here, I'll do this for everybody again. And if you haven't, hit the like button, please. Okay, we got 10 minutes. An alarmed Army report published in 2012 found that violent crime in the ranks shot up 31% between 2006 and 2011. That year, the Army recorded 122 homicides among its soldiers. Mine too, Donald. Mine too. On active duty at the time were 42,698 convicted criminal offenders, 11,000. Hey, Joey Bag of Donuts. And 11,257 convicted drug and alcohol offenders. The roster of criminal offenders included 4,877 soldiers convicted of multiple felonies. 438 active duty soldiers had been convicted of multiple violent sex crimes. Some families were breaking under the stress. Domestic violence cases across the Army rose 50% between 2008 and 2011. while incidents of child abuse climbed 62%. Pajo, that's the whole purpose of my channel is to put out there what others may not. Okay, take the call, tell him hello. Is to get these issues out and to talk about them, whether you're a veteran, whether you're a loved one, no matter what. So, domestic violence case at 62%. By 2010, almost 4,000 military personnel from all services were hospitalized for attempting or threatening suicide. That year, 280 active duty, reserve, Army, National Guard soldiers died by suicide, along with 15 military family members. Well, Biggins is a good place to be. If I'll share his channel here in a second. PTSD doesn't only affect you; you bring it home to your family. I know, Vested. I figured you were. I know you're always here. Family members there's a phenomenon that has been studied as secondary PTSD, right? Where yes, I do. I know. You are a busy woman. So where your family members start suffering some after effects of or effects of your PTSD. It is a sad situation that occurs that needs to be addressed more. Yes. Notice, and I hate, notice that when I get upset, it's when we're talking about those we left behind when we left, and the contact and everything. That's what hurts me the most. And then that guilt of leaving. I had the guilt, and I know this is going to be probably clipped. I thank you, Wingspan. I appreciate it. Guilt of killing a guy, searching him, finding pictures of him with his kids, and then coming home to my kids, dealing with that guilt because I left them. But what if I orphan these kids? Anyway, it's, yeah. Sorry. I think I'm going to call it here so we can get ready for tops. We know that top doesn't go long, so once we're done at tops, go hit Big and up. He plays a lighthearted show most of the time. Sometimes those police interactions get heart-wrenching. But let's go over to tops and hopefully have a less depressing time. So I'll see you all over there. Y'all be good. Thank y'all for joining. Same time tomorrow. Hey, Justin.